This week, more than 60 educational groups called on Congress to take immediate steps to support and protect historically black colleges and universities, known as HBCUs, after a wave of bomb threats against them. Federal authorities say more than a dozen HBCUs nationwide received bomb threats this month alone. February is Black History Month. This is Dr. David Wilson, president of one of the HBCUs, Morgan State University, testifying Thursday at a congressional hearing on the violent intimidation.
As a young black boy growing up in rural, segregated Jim Crow, Alabama, on a sharecropping plantation, who was not permitted to, of course, attend school full-time until I was in the 7th grade, I have experienced firsthand this type of trauma and this type of racial violence, if you will. And this is why I have devoted my entire career to providing educational leadership to campuses to enable them to nurture the intellectual growth of Black students and not to stifle it. And it is so unfortunate that there is so much hatred in our nation today, being held by those who are trying to simply prevent HBCUs from educating a disproportionate number of Black students. Yes, the vast majority of these more than 100 institutions have been around since the mid-19th century. And from their inception, they have just simply been targets of domestic terrorism.
David Wilson is president of Morgan State University, testifying remotely before the House Committee. Just on Thursday, a bomb threat paused classes at Fayetteville State University in North Carolina before classes resumed at the 155-year-old school established shortly after the Civil War. Today, we spend the rest of the hour with the legendary documentarian Stanley Nelson, who's made more than 30 films about the Black American experience, including a 2017 PBS documentary on the pivotal role played by historically Black colleges and universities in shaping Black life, creating a Black middle class, and dismantling segregation. Nelson's received his first Oscar nomination for his new film about Attica, the prison uprising. We'll talk about that in a minute. But first, this trailer for Tell Them We're Rising, the story of Black colleges and universities.
The question for African Americans has always been, what is education's purpose? Who controls it? And what is the relationship of education to the broader aspirations of our people?
The more the system denies you the chance to read and to write, the more that becomes a prize that you must have.
Black colleges were redefining what it meant to be Black in America. You were pursuing a career where intellect mattered.
An educated Black population could not be an enslaved Black population.
If you weren't out there demonstrating, then something had to be wrong with your school.
We wanted freedom now, but whites were not prepared for any changes here.
I think they should be kept out any way possible.
A slaveholder could work a slave to death. He could rape a slave. He could do virtually anything but teach a slave how to read or write.
As soon as the war breaks out, the first thing they want is to get an education.
They wanted those schools to be as free as possible from paternalism, from racism, whether subtle or blatant.
Movements are easily birthed on HBCU's campuses.
We must love and protect each other.
We're all going through the same experience.
HBCU is somewhere where I can be completely myself.
The Black college experience provides the place to be in the majority. That is such a unique and empowering experience.
This HBCU experience has taught me that anything is possible as long as you have that one spark.
Tell Them We're Rising, the story of Black colleges and universities, the 2017 film by Stanley Nelson, one of the leading documentarians of the Black American experience. Stanley, welcome back to Democracy Now! In a moment, we're going to talk about the film you've been nominated for an Oscar for, Attica. But can you talk about the significance of HBCUs and the threats they're facing right through to today, this dramatic congressional hearing that took place yesterday on the bomb threats?
First off, Amy, thank you so much for having me on. The significance of HBCUs, cannot be overstated. It's probably been the biggest pusher for African Americans to come into the middle class. My parents both went to HBCUs. The significance of HBCUs can't be, it's just amazing. And I think it's really significant because HBCUs, many of them were formed right after the Civil War. And so they've been around for over 150 years. And I think the threat that they're under now is really significant and really is really telling, because it's kind of like where this country is, that 150 years after their formation, once again, they're under threat. When they were first formed in the 1870s, 1880s, they were burned and under threat. And now, 150 years later, they're under threat again.
And how have HBCUs developed? What has changed over these years and the role they play in American society and the stress, especially during the pandemic, that these schools face?
I think it's really interesting because in many ways, the role they play is very similar to the role they played early on. They've always played a role for African Americans to get an education who might not get an education in any other way. So when they were first formed, African Americans were not allowed in colleges. Today, African Americans, are allowed in colleges, but the grade school education, the high school education that African Americans get so many times is inferior. So still, HBCUs are a way for African Americans to go to college, and many of them then go on to mainstream institutions for graduate school and are kind of vaulted into the middle class. So I think in many ways, the role that they play is really similar for the role that they played historically.
And the development of Black leadership in the United States, the number of people have gone who are leaders in all different professions.
Yeah, I mean, we can name them, from Kamala Harris to, W.B. Du Bois, so they've played a huge role, and in so many ways. There's one little bit of that clip you played. They're in many ways still like Wakanda for African Americans. It's a way for 4 years of your life to be in the majority, for 4 years of your life, maybe, just maybe, to be away from the racism and the racially charged atmosphere that's so prevalent in the United States.